Sunday, the 4th of July, Sunday, Independence Day Sunday. A few thoughts around this title, A Clever Dodge. What we see here in this passage that we listen to is a glimpse into the complex world, religiously and politically, and intertwining of those worlds in the time of Jesus. It's a very cryptic description, but it's remarkable in the sense that it's one of the passages, if you compare the three synoptic gospels, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where the description or the texts do not vary much. You often get passages where each author has his or her, let's make it his for practical purposes, own interpretation and understanding. But in this passage, it's remarkably consistent, the text across all three of the Gospels. So there's probably a very good probability that this is a description of an authentic occurrence. Let's leave that there. It's a complex world that we encounter here and get a peek into. There's mention of the Pharisees and of the Herodians and of the emperor and so forth. I think most people know that at the time of Jesus, the Roman Empire occupied Israel, part of the province either of Idumea or Judea, different parts of Israel. And they occupied it like they normally occupy a place, with strong military force, with brutality when you go against their understanding of justice. And there's mention of the Herodians as well. Now, the Herodians were the followers of King Herod, a brutal Jewish king that was instituted or put in power by the Roman Senate about 40 years before Jesus was born. A brutal dictator that killed off all his male descendants, everyone, up to the nephews, to make sure that nobody pulls a coup on him. So he was firmly in charge as the Jewish king, but a king appointed by the Romans. They decided the dynasty that ruled the Jewish people as their king for about 100 years before that. That's not good enough. They bring in Herod, a very loyal Roman supporter. And then there's mention of the Pharisees. Pharisees, one of the, in today's terms, they would be political parties. The two main parties in those days were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Also religiously based, as Israel's life was, centered in the temple, which was the religious, cultural, and political capital of the Jewish people. The Pharisees were the ones among the parties, the two main parties in Israel, and there were a few others at that stage, that had the philosophy of cooperating with the Roman occupiers, that said it's better for us, for the survival of the Jewish people, not to oppose them in everything, but try and work out an understanding so that we can benefit from it and not be destroyed by the Roman Empire. They were people that did not base their authority and their standing, their status, and support in the Jewish community on the temple, but on teachings, on the study of the law. And when the temple was destroyed, they managed to survive, and they were the strongest influence that made synagogues spread even more after the destruction of the temple, and because of their study of the law and their emphasis on the scriptures, it helped Judaism survive without a temple until today. The Sadducees was the other party, theologically more conservative, that were opposed to anything Roman and had their power base in the temple. They ran the priesthood. That's a glimpse into a very complex world. Once you start reading about this stuff, it can either be extremely boring or very interesting depending on your inclination and what kind of person you are. It will make Game of Thrones or any other similar endeavor on TV pale in comparison. Very interesting stuff, who kills who and who usurps who and who walks with who for what period of time, etc. I will not bore you with that. Jesus made a very clever dodge here. He was an excellent teacher and I think a formidable opponent. If he would have been part of presidential debates, he would have wiped the floor with opponents. Although I don't know if TV audiences would understand how clever he really was. They laid a trap for him. They wanted to set him up, either for the Jews to reject him or for the Romans to kill him, to arrest him and get rid of him. So they asked, should you pay taxes to the oppressor? Should you pay taxes to the emperor? And Jesus took that coin and referring to the image of the emperor on there, he said, whose image is this? That is a transgression of Jewish law, to make a graven image of a god. And the emperor declared himself God. So Jesus, if the emperor was a true God, said through that, this guy has already transgressed the law if he was a proper God. Look, here's a graven image of that God that he condones and that he uses. He didn't say pay taxes to Caesar. He said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. In effect, saying again, this is the image of Caesar. People think he is God and he declared himself God. But give to him what belongs to him and give to God, the real God, what belongs to God. So undercutting the argument again that Caesar is God without directly opposing it to this implication very cleverly. He also didn't get on the wrong side of the Jewish people, because he didn't say pay tax, that's good. He just said, gives to this false god what belongs to the false god, and give to God, the real God, what belongs to God. I think that gives us a little bit of an idea of the intensity of the involvement of the religious motives in everything in the time of Jesus. It was not just a matter of practicing your religion. It was very much mixed in and often the basis of all power play. And Jesus avoided this here, that power play and being sucked into their arguments and squabbles, by this clever dodge, which really wasn't a dodge. He made a very firm statement, but in such a clever way that I think it took them a while to figure out what really happened there. It wasn't unique to the time of Israel that religion was involved in and used in power play and also in political power play. Throughout humankind's history, the priestly class was very closely associated with the rulers, and the political power in any given society. The priests were there, and their role was to bestow authority, divine authority, on whoever was in charge. How do you argue with somebody when the religion of a specific entity, let's say the Egyptians, when the priestly class says God, whoever the God or the gods, prefers this one to be the ruler? And this is what the God says about this one. This is what the gods tell us to share with you about this person who is the ruler, the Pharaoh. That is in the cases where that person wasn't declared God himself. How do you argue with that? It's still the case today. People say, God told me to do this. And in some cases we accept that. In other cases we tell them, go see a psychiatrist. It's still the case that religious authority is mixed in as one element of power, and especially political power. It is part of our makeup as humanity. Depending on the degree of secularization, it is diminishing in some parts of the world. But as an illustration, that is still part of the world, even in circles where one would think that the church no longer has such a big influence in the annexation of Crimea. When the Spetsnaz, the Russian special forces, moved in, right with them, the Orthodox Russian Church, the priests were there, right on the front line, moving with them. I saw that by chance when I watched the video of what happened there. And I could see right behind the Spetsnaz troops, there were the priests of the Orthodox Church. On Independence Day, apart from demonstrating our flag, and as I said, the church is now the proud owner of a 5x8 American flag that I ask our facilities, our sexton, to put up between the two columns in the front. Apart from listening to the Stars and Stripes Forever, the beautiful piano piece, apart from barbecuing and parades, what do we make of Independence Day? What are the hopes, perhaps the fears, the aspirations that we have on this day as Americans? What are our concerns? What are our joys related to our nation and this republic? What emotions do we experience? Pride, resolve, commitment to preserve something, an aspiration to be something and to move into the future and create something of lasting influence. Something good, perhaps, something noble. If we look at our history, I think it is part of the DNA of this nation. And I'm talking only about the commencement of the history of the colonial history of the USA. To have mention of God in the histories. And it's very interesting for me as an immigrant to improve my knowledge about that part of history, American history as well. And each year I read something new. And if you look at the two colonies, Jamestown and Plymouth Plantation, both funded by the London Company to be enterprises aiming to make money. And people being indentured for 7 years to that company. When they arrived here and their passage was paid here to the US. The Jamestown colony religion wasn't that clearly and prominently displayed, and part of the founding of that colony. And the Plymouth Plantation, yes, that was more important. However, the more I read, the more I see it didn't make much difference in the behavior of the settlers towards the indigenous population. The massacres were equally bloody. And I don't think they were necessarily bad people. I think they were people. That is what we tend to do. But God was mentioned there, and it's interesting to wonder what the God was that these people brought with him, or who the God was, if you prefer to use that term. Was it the same God as the God of the founding fathers, who was more of a deist God, a God who more or less wound up the world in the beginning and put it out there and said, okay, run on your own. Do your thing. I've done my part. And God, more of being an observer and perhaps a sustainer. And the term providence used prominently in all literature regarding the founding fathers and their beliefs. Or was it the God of war that was also strongly present in the time of Jesus among the Israelites? The warrior God, who from the theology and the thinking of despair after occupying army were destroying the soul of Israel. Where the theology of despair gave birth to apocalyptic literature like we find in the book of Revelation referring to the Roman occupation. Where God was wanted to intervene, to come and fight the battle for his people and wipe out the enemy. I think it behooves us on Independence Day to pause and take stock in our religious thinking. What are the images of God that we are working with? And how is that mixed in with our thinking about our republic, its future, its place in the world? And to what extent is there a distinction between what Jesus called, or what Jesus referred to, the image of Caesar, and all that it represents? To what extent is it distinguishable from the images of God that we work with? It is not always clear, and it gets complicated once you really start to drill down and think deeply. I believe that in our essential makeup as a people, as Americans, there is the DNA of what the Pilgrims brought, that image and the idea of the city on the hill, the place where God's love rules, and the place that can be a guiding light to everybody there and to the world. There are different versions and understanding of that as well. And again on Independence Day, let us, gathered here, make the time, and especially in these days, make sure that we do not conscript God or our image of God in this partisan madness that we have to live through. That DNA of the city on the hill, in all its richness and symbolism, speak to us and be the dominant theme that we carry in us and with us into the future as we, as Americans, but also especially as God's people, this covenant community, walk with one another to be and to create a world that resembles something that Jesus spoke about. Amen.